Today's presentation comes from our Beating Anxiety series. So we are going to focus on understanding and developing coping strategies to reduce your worry. This is from the Counseling and Psychological Services Office, CAPS, at the IU Health Center, 4th floor. You can reach us by calling 812-855-5711 and select option 1 for our after hours crisis line. Today is going to function just like any of the live workshops, but you're going to be encouraged to press pause during the video to be able to fully and effectively do the journal prompts, to be able to offer yourself enough time to explore and write down your responses. Therefore, you're going to need about 45 to 50 minutes. The actual video itself is roughly about 30-35 minutes or so, but to be able to actually get the full-length experience, you will need to press pause and complete some of those activities. You're also going to want to do these journal prompts effectively by writing down your responses. So you'll need a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper, or feel free to use a notes section of your phone or type your responses on your computer as well. This allows you to fully dive into the questions being asked, be able to explore some of your barriers, develop insight, and examine available coping strategies and skills. So we'll dive right into the material. It's really important for us to first examine any of those differences between stress and anxiety. And as you can see, each of the following bullet points kind of are similar yet different at the same time. So stress is a response to a known environmental factor, and while anxiety can be in response to that, it can also occur without an identifiable trigger. Stress, it typically does go away when the stressor does, and with anxiety, the symptoms persist. Stress is something everybody experiences in some capacity. We can't always say the same thing about anxiety, and certainly the intensity can be exaggerated by stress. Anxiety can also cause significant distress and interfere with daily life, and while that does come up for stress, it might not be as persistent or have as strong of intensity. Stress does have the ability to be motivational, and we typically find that with anxiety, especially chronic and intense anxiety, it is not often motivational. So we do want to understand the differences because they can often overlap and be very difficult to discern. Is this stress? Is this anxiety? What do I need to intervene? What coping strategies are available for me? So on and so forth. So for our first set of journal questions, I want you to take a moment and think about a recent anxiety or nerve-wracking situation. What types of feelings did this situation evoke, and what corresponding symptoms of anxiety do you personally experience? Pause the video to record your responses, and when you're ready, press play to continue. The next two slides are going to offer you the ability just to look over some common anxiety symptoms, and I want you to look at your responses. Are there any symptoms that correlate, or are there any symptoms that you didn't realize were anxiety symptoms? Often I'll have individuals let me know that they don't feel like they experience anxiety because they don't have any of the physical symptoms. Anxiety can still be behavioral, cognitive, and emotional, and sometimes not show up as much physically. Or you might notice the physical symptoms are when your anxiety is at the absolute worst, but are there behavioral, cognitive, or emotional symptoms that come up when your anxiety isn't as bad? So I want you just to look at this. I'll give you a brief couple of moments to notice it, and feel free to pause the video if you need more time. And notice, are there any of these symptoms that are different or similar for you? Same with the emotional. And certainly I might not have hit all of them, and if I missed anything, that's okay. Everybody's experience with anxiety is unique and individual. But it is important for us that we ultimately learn to develop insight on how anxiety shows up for you at its worst and at its least obvious, and everything in between. As the more insight we can develop and awareness, we can also learn how to cope and navigate it effectively. Our next journal question is going to be kind of taking a twist on anxiety, so it is important that we think about what could be a benefit or a perceived benefit to you for experiencing anxiety. Does it make you feel like your motivation's increased? Maybe you have the perceived ability to anticipate a threat, which makes that threat feel less scary. Any protection from vulnerability. What could be a perceived benefit for you to experiencing anxiety? Pause the video and press play when you're ready to move on. We do want to talk about anxiety and any perceived benefits because those perceived benefits make it difficult to fully feel like it's okay to cope with or let go of anxiety. Often individuals might feel like it's motivating. So if I wasn't chronically anxious about not being good enough in school, I might not be a straight A student and slack and fail out. Often that's what our anxiety narrative is telling us. So this idea of coping with and challenging our thoughts, using any of the tools that you might have learned in other videos online or in therapy, might not feel like you can fully apply them because there's this partial benefit that's causing you to hold on to it. So therefore, many people anticipate that if we had absolutely no anxiety, you wouldn't experience any motivation, and then therefore you wouldn't keep up with responsibilities or maybe care about social norms or whatever typically makes you anxious. Usually with moderate levels of arousal from stress or anxiety, we do experience some motivation, but finding that sweet spot is very, very difficult. That sweet spot of being just nervous or stressed or anxious enough about completing this thing or this social interaction or so on and so forth, which allows you to feel prepared, concentrated, and motivated to do the task. But often we experience high levels of anxiety. We find ourselves thinking about not wanting to let go of it because of those moderate levels of arousal, but we're often spending most times in the high intensity levels of anxiety. When we're there, we feel overly preoccupied with the anxiety. We often engage in avoidance strategies, trying to leave the situation. We'll talk more about that fight, flight, freeze response. You might perform poorly due to increased symptomology. You might get mental fog, any of those physical symptoms, not feel like you can show up as your best self, which can certainly snowball that anxiety further. So we do want to recognize that we might be thinking we spend more time in the moderate level than we actually do. And is our anxiety more disruptful than it is helpful for us? And how can we break down any of those perceived benefits to it to make it easier to cope with it effectively? Now, as I mentioned before, it is important to know what's happening in your body, especially if you are noticing yourself labeling a lot of physical symptoms or finding that when you do have those really high, intense moments of anxiety, the physical symptoms, the mental fog, maybe any sweating, heart palpitations get in your way. I do want to normalize that experience so you can understand what's happening in your body and sometimes how your body might be working against you. So anxiety triggers our body to respond in a physiological way. So essentially, there's a very primitive part of your brain, which is your amygdala. And your amygdala is responsible for your emotions. So your amygdala has an evolutionary instinct to protect us from danger. This is what it would do for our ancestors. So it kept our ancestors safe from any possible threats in the wild, getting eaten by a lion, a bear, ever being excluded from a social group because that was far more detrimental to their lives back in the day than it possibly is now. Our amygdala has kept us safe. It protects us from danger. It's our anxiety switch. It's like flipping a light switch, and it tells our body to go into an automatic mode, and it's helping us prepare to either fight something off, run away from it, or freeze, aka avoid the scary thing, like just stop there, freeze, don't do anything. So while it used to keep our ancestors safe, it doesn't always keep us safe now. Sometimes it does. Certainly if you go to touch a hot oven stove and you have the immediate desire to pull your hand away, that is a great way that our brain is helping keep us safe. Now, if our brain is telling us that we need to run away from the impending doom of a text message or a math assignment or a science lab report, when it's not actually that scary the way that it was for our ancestors, it's going to trigger some unhelpful ways of responding. So it is important to recognize that your brain doesn't really know the difference between an actual bear out in the wild and a metaphorical bear. This chart is taken from Psychology Tools. As you can see here, psychologytools.com. So this does a great job really showing us exactly what happens in your body. So, as you can see from the brain perspective, your thoughts are racing. It's helping you evaluate the threat quickly and rapidly so that way you can make a decision very quickly about what to do in response to the danger. So, you might find that typically your thoughts are escalating quickly, you're snowballing very fast, you're worried about not being successful, or you even have like tunnel vision. So, you feel like you have a lot of mental fog, things are blurry. Or it's becoming sharper. You can only focus on the one thing. Dizziness, lightheadedness, dry mouth. Reason that the dizzy and lightheadedness occurs is because your breathing is becoming quicker and shallower. It helps your body take in more oxygen to be able to either fight the thing off or run away from it. Because we're taking in more oxygen, and we're taking it in a way where we're not actually going to physically run away from this thing, it will trigger more dizziness and lightheadedness. Heart's beating faster because it's wanting to send more blood to your muscles, help you fight the thing off, run away. It actually sends blood to your hands to prepare you to fight, which is why often people's arms become tingly. There's a lot going on with the adrenal gland, the bladder. Hands can get cold as well. Again, the blood vessels are constricting. They're sweaty because they're trying to keep your body cool to be a more efficient machine. And your muscles are tensing. As you can see, these are all the symptoms of anxiety that people will often mention. Heart palpitations, difficulty breathing, feeling sweaty, mental fog, so on and so forth. When in actuality, that is your body's way of responding to a threat, either real, perceived, external, or internal. So our body is often working against us. When it notices that a threat is coming up, it's going to send us into our sympathetic nervous system and cause us to try and respond in the most quick, efficient, and effective way. Now, it is important to note that this doesn't always help us. In fact, it's what usually triggers our anxiety further. Even though you know that your body's just finding a way to respond, noticing that you have the heart palpitations because it is associated with anxiety might make you feel more anxious. So we do want to understand what could be contributing to your body's physiological and psychological response. So for these journal questions, think about what are some anxiety-provoking threats or situations that you may experience today, or just in general. What types of situations, feelings, or threats may your amygdala be responding to as a threat? Pause the video to record your response, and when you're ready, press play and we can move on. So, as we've discovered, all threats are different. So, what one person's amygdala and even just self-responds to as a threat might be different than the next person, but our brains are going to react exactly the same. So, what that means is if you see an actual bear in front of you or whatever you think is scary, your brain will react the same. Now, if the other person doesn't find that scary, their brain might not react the same. So, we do have to understand our unique differences. And recognize, normalize, and validate that our brain is primitive and it is going to deal with that perceived or real threat the same way it would any life-threatening situations that our ancestors might have gone through. Now, because we know that our amygdala is often mistriggered, it can be tough to distinguish between what is actually a threat and what's a perceived threat. And when our bodies are working against us and our minds are working against us, it's hard to slow down and go, hey, wait, is this something that's actually scary? Is this something I need to truly be afraid of? Or am I just thinking that I do? And is my amygdala misfiring right now? Is it being mistriggered? So it's really hard to slow that down and distinguish the difference for ourselves. So it is really important that we develop insight about what our amygdala is responding to, and that we rationalize and know that everybody has different things and triggers and threats and responses that make them feel anxious, and anxiety does show up differently for everybody. Now, it is also important to note that these physiological symptoms do often cause people the most distress because they do look like a lot of other things. Heart palpitations can feel very, very scary, and that can just escalate that anxiety further. So understanding that we are safe and reminding our bodies that we're safe, seeing it as just a physiological response, not something to always be afraid of, though certainly I we want to be able to discern that difference, can really help ground us. Now, again, because these symptoms are so scary or they're strong indicators of you feeling anxious, they're typically what we try and avoid. So if your heart's beating really fast, your palms are getting sweaty right before you have to give a speech, you might need to immediately excuse yourself to go to the bathroom. You want to get out of that situation as fast as possible. You might freeze up. You might try and fight it off by saying like really difficult comments to yourself, but they're typically what we are responding to. So let's discuss these 5 coping strategies to reduce your worry now that you have a bit more of an understanding and hopefully have increased your empathy about yourself and what's going on physiologically in your body and how that correlates to those physical symptoms of anxiety. My first tip is about playing detective with yourself. And what this is just continuing to really develop insight, having increased insight and awareness as to what's going on, why it's going on, can be really helpful in understanding when to intervene and also being able to understand what's actually happening and reminding yourself that you're safe. So it is important to understand how anxiety shows up for you, what symptoms come up, what are you triggered by, so on and so forth. What are those physiological, cognitive, emotional symptoms of anxiety? So we want to help you try and identify what are your anxious triggers. Are there any thoughts or situations or feelings or people? What is your typical response? Do you fight? Do you run away? Do you freeze? Does this look different depending upon the trigger? And then what's your response pattern? Does your typical way of responding actually help you in both the short and the long term? Or does it perpetuate the anxiety? So to really break this down, and this is taken from the Anxiety Toolbox workbook, which has been adapted from Purdue and Cal Poly. This does a great job really allowing you space to play that detective. So you can utilize this. Feel free to take a screenshot. And if you're feeling anxious, ask yourself, what is going on? Where are you? Who are you with? What's going on? What did you feel anxious about? And then identify what's happening physically, emotionally, behaviorally, and cognitively, and understand how all of these might go together and actually increase your anxiety, or are you responding in a way that actually decreases it? The thing is we will often find that our typical way of responding, especially if it's avoidance-based, doesn't usually help us in both the short term and the long term. It might help us more so in the short term, but doesn't usually help in the long term. Not always the case, but it is important to analyze it. So then our question is, are there more helpful behaviors to actually reduce the anxiety in both the short term and the long term? Are there any strategies that you can apply cognitively? Where is the anxiety showing up and is it becoming most unmanageable? And how does the relationship between all of these perpetuate the anxiety further? So this can really help us understand how to navigate and cope with anxiety on a specific and unique level. Tip 2 is deep breathing. Because we know that our body is so responsive and is often working against us, we need to find a way to send ourselves back into our parasympathetic nervous system. So since your body is trying to have you run away, freeze, or fight something off, it's not oxygenating the prefrontal cortex as sufficiently, which if it's not oxygenating the prefrontal cortex, this is responsible for memory and decision making. It can make it very, very difficult to remember what I've been saying on here or your therapist has said or any other podcast, audiobook, or article you've read has told you to do. Instead, it is just trying to respond quickly, efficiently, and keep you safe. So because of that, and it's really hard to remember, we might not remember that we need to do this next slide, behave differently. Instead, our most primary way of responding can be learning how to calm our bodies down to get them to a point where we can respond with the other strategies. Deep breathing is highly effective as it can help reset your vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve allows you to send yourself back into the parasympathetic nervous system. It sends a signal to your brain that you're safe. So it's a great coping strategy physiologically. Helps oxygenate your prefrontal cortex, and then that can help you remember to engage in all these other strategies. Now, the important tip is if we're engaging with this, and your anxiety is a 10 out of 10 for intensity, 0 being not intense, 10 being as intense as it can be, it is unlikely that this is going to bring you from a 10 to a 0. So I encourage people to think of it as going down a ladder. Can you engage in deep breathing and take yourself from a 10 to a 9? Great. Can you do it some more, and will that bring you from a 9 to an 8? Continue doing that until you get yourself to the point where you feel like you can then engage in other strategies, rather than believing that every strategy has to go from 10 to 0 or 0 to 60 very, very quickly for you. We want to try and approach engaging in our coping strategies from a ladder perspective. And know that we often have to respond to our bodies, the physiology first, and then behaviorally, emotionally, and cognitively second. These are some great techniques that I like to use and encourage people to do for deep breathing, especially because they're very easy to implement anywhere you're at. The first is a 5 senses technique. So if you're feeling anxious or stressed or activated, ask yourself, what are 5 things you can see? 4 things you can touch or feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. If you're working yourself down the ladder and you're in a room and you don't feel like there's much else to label or you can see, can you name shapes or colors or sizes of things? Can you actually touch something and feel the texture? Ask yourself to feel very different specific parts of the chair, so on and so forth, trying to get really specific about it to offer yourself more to help work down that physiological ladder. The 5-finger technique, and I encourage you to try it today, is you're going to open up your left hand, fan it out like a star, and then you can place it on top of a table near a surface, or if you can't do that, just have it out in front of you. Then take your right pointer finger on your opposite hand and begin tracing alongside the hand that is fanned out. So you're going to start tracing alongside of your thumb. Breathe in as you trace along the outside of your thumb, hold it, and then exhale as you trace along the inside of the finger. Breathe in as you trace along the outside of your pointer, pause, breathe out as you trace along the inside. And you're going to repeat that for the remaining 4. This can be very sensory oriented as you can feel all the different nooks, crannies, veins, wrinkles, so on and so forth of your hand. And it really helps slow down the breathing and gives you something to focus on. Again, this can be very easily done under your desk in a room full of people. It's a little more obvious in the 5 senses, but I like to encourage people to have both that are available. You might have also thought of other deep breathing activities that work for you, and that's great. I certainly encourage you to explore that. Play with maybe some phone applications like Calm.com, Headspace, so on and so forth. That could also be great strategies. But I like having both of these in your back pocket as I think they can be very easily done and remembered when needed. As mentioned, there are plenty of mindfulness phone apps. I've included many of them here. I encourage you to screenshot. Calm.com is one of my personal favorites because the background noises, you can change it to like thunderstorms or waves, and I find that just to be very therapeutic. There's lots of meditations on there. I know like LeBron James even reads some. They have bedtime stories. There's a free version, so you can't access everything, but if you'd like to access everything, it's about $60 for the year. And as you can see, Calm.com, Headspace, Stop, Think, Breathe, and Aura, which are just some of the few that I've listed, all are between roughly $59 and $70, pretty comparable. Headspace, it looks like, is a little bit different. It has courses or single-use activities. They all have free versions or trials that you can utilize. I love Stop, Think, Breathe. It requires you to check in with how you're feeling. It's a great way to really wonder, when am I utilizing the app? Am I only using it when I feel good? Am I only using it when I feel bad? Are there similarities to how I'm feeling? What might be coming up? A great way to increase that insight. It is less robust in terms of options for mindfulness activities, but I love the check-in version. Aura is similar to, it has less things that you're able to check in on with Stop, Think, Breathe. You rate how you're feeling mentally, physically, as well as you're able to select 5 different emotions. Aura has a little bit less, but it's still a great option as well and a little bit more robust. I encourage you, play around with these phone apps, play around with these grounding activities, and try and think of bringing your anxiety down like climbing down a ladder rather than jumping off the ladder, as jumping off the ladder is much more anxiety provoking and not often effective. It is important to test these out, especially the mindfulness phone apps, because if you do not like the person who is reading it off, if you don't find their voice relaxing, it's probably not going to be helpful. So we need to be able to remember that this is something that works for us, both when we're feeling very anxious, a little bit anxious, and everything in between. For these journal questions, I want you to think about what are other deep breathing exercises that you've used before, and what types of mindfulness phone applications have been helpful for you. Pause the video to record your responses, and when you're ready, press play and we can move on. Tip 3 is sleep hygiene, and I'm sure you've heard it before, but it is wildly important for learning how to cope with anxiety because so much is happening in your brain and body while you sleep. If you want to learn more about sleep hygiene and good sleep strategies, because this is troublesome for you, we do have another pre-recorded option that does title sleep. So I encourage you to check that out for more in-depth information. But for now, I want you to remember that your brain is hard at work forming pathways, which is necessary for learning and consolidating the information you've taken in. Often people will wake up feeling possibly less anxious about the thing they were more anxious about that night, or vice versa. Or not getting a good night's sleep can contribute to increased anxiety. Because sleep deprivation will impact your mood, your energy, memory, grades, ability to focus. It can have wild impact on your anxiety, both physiologically, psychologically, and physically as well. So it is essential that we do think about sleep as a viable way to cope with anxiety. Some basic sleep hygiene ideas, again, our other pre-recorded web workshop goes into this deeper, but get regular, trying to go to bed and or wake up around the same time frame each day. If you can't fall asleep in about 20-30 minutes, get up, do something else, and try again rather than just tossing and turning in bed. Avoiding caffeine and nicotine, especially after certain times, same with alcohol. Doing your best to only have your bed be for sleeping, which is so difficult. I know I did so much homework during grad school in bed, which is just not helpful. I love watching TV in there, reading books. Doing your best to associate your bed with sleeping. Having an electronics curfew. The blue light can be really detrimental on you physiologically in trying to be able to sleep. So perhaps putting that somewhere else. Now you are going to have to address some of those barriers. Like we often use our phones for alarm clocks. If that's you, you might have to consider actually getting an alarm clock or even trying to set your phone across the room. Right space, no naps, sleep rituals. So how are you signaling to your body that it's time to fall asleep? Trying not to watch the clock, which is so difficult, and also paying attention to your daytime routine, what's happening throughout the day that makes you feel more sleepy or less sleepy. So journal, what is one way you can improve your sleep hygiene? And what do you notice about your stress and anxiety when you get accurate sleep, nutrition, and exercise? When you're ready, please feel free to press play and move on. Otherwise, pause the video and record your responses. Tip 4, we only have 2 more left, is to set a worry period. So this is a very different way of responding because it's essentially encouraging you to postpone your worry. It's saying, Hey, worry, you're important to me. I just am going to worry about you during a time when it's more convenient, which can help the worry feel less intrusive and allow you to feel a bit more in control. So here's how you do it. You're going to set a specific time of day. So where are you going to allow yourself to worry? Again, probably shouldn't be in your bed. How long are you going to give yourself to worry, and when does this occur? Does this occur every day, 3 days a week, twice a day? So you might say, I'm going to worry every night at 8:30 on the bench outside of my house. So you go out there, you're going to give yourself, let's say, 15 minutes. You have 15 minutes, you get to worry about everything. Between then, as soon as you have any anxious thoughts, write them down and tell yourself, I will get to worry about it later. When I sit down in my worry period, I will be in a much better position to deal with this. So you're actually telling yourself, this is important. I'm going to come back to it rather than the anxiety having to be pesky and come around still. Then decide what's most important for you to do right now. Focus on something that's practical, attainable, pleasurable, active, or nurturing. You might want to engage in those grounding strategies. You might have that worry pop up again and have to continue to remind yourself to write that down. And then come back to it during your designated worry period. You might find that it's less worrisome for you. You might find it's still worrisome, and then you can engage in journal prompts. Maybe you're talking through it out loud, problem solving, other strategies, so on and so forth. But then you get to worry about whatever you need to worry about from that day in those 15 minutes or 20 or 30, however many minutes you set up. And then when that timer goes off, everything else just starts over again. It's important to be flexible with this. You might find that you need more worry periods throughout the day at first. Great. And then as you find that you need less time or less worry periods, then reduce it. I want you to be flexible and accommodating with this because ultimately we're trying to validate and work with our anxiety, befriend it, but befriend it in a way that still allows us to feel more so in control. So this can give us the option to postpone the worry, and also notice that maybe there's a lot of things on that list that we didn't actually need to worry about. I love using this chart, and I encourage you to screenshot it because this helps really develop the insight further. What were you worried about? How did you postpone it? Were you able to postpone it? And then what happened when you got to the worry period? And then what did you learn from it? Really being able to break that down to understand further your triggers, available coping strategies, and how effective this is working out. And then last but not least is the idea of practicing self-care. Self-care is so important in being able to cope with both stress and anxiety. It creates consistency, routine, and it reduces chronic stress. But know that it's not a hobby. It's not just me telling you to go out and figure out something that you want to do. Instead, it is something that promotes action and responsibility of your needs to care for, increase, and sustain your emotional, physical, and mental health. I want you to try and view self-care as being essential. It is something that we need to remind ourselves and others that we need to take care of ourselves too, that we deserve to be included on our ever-expanding to-do list. It is not often what you do, but instead why you do it. So instead of thinking, okay, I need to go out and get super good at a spin class because that's what so-and-so does for self-care, that doesn't fit you, then it's important to find what can fit you to create some consistency, routine, and reduce the overall chronic stress and anxiety, even if it's small. So when you think about this, I want you to journal what self-care practices are important to you and how can you challenge yourself to make them more of a priority. What self-care practices will be hard to maintain and how do you mitigate or approach those barriers? Pause the video to record your responses. Now that we've ended the vast majority of this video, let's say you try this out or you finish this and you're like, I still need more. I felt like that was good, or perhaps it wasn't good and I need more. I need something more individualized. This is a great way to determine if additional services are needed. Is there an increase in other mental health symptoms? Any changes in your functioning? academically, social, at work, changes of sleep, appetite, or hygiene. And then any of those thoughts of suicide, harm to others, or self-harm are all indicators that seeking something beyond this workshop, either pre-recorded or live, is necessary. So that's where the Counseling and Psychological Services Office comes in. We do have those additional services available to you. We have individual and group counseling as well as after-hours crisis care. So our after-hours crisis care is available by calling us at 812-855-5711, and you can select option 1 to be able to talk with someone. If our office is physically open, we always have emergency walk-in appointments available to you. Typically, our hours are Monday through Friday, 8 until 4:30 p.m. You are able to walk right up, say that it's an emergency, and you'll be seen as soon as possible. Now, I do encourage you to always utilize our website to assess for any changes to either our operations or our hours in general, to make sure you have the most up-to-date information. If it's not an emergency and you are just looking to be seen for one or a couple appointments, you can dial 812-855-5711. Yes, that is the same number, and ask to schedule your first appointment. You will be booked in a 30-minute CAPS Now appointment, which is an initial counseling appointment. It lets you and your counselor work together to determine what you're needing for that appointment and beyond. If you can't wait and it's not an emergency and you're thinking, I just need to talk with someone for 30 minutes and that's all, and it's just a quick consultation, we do have free drop-in appointments, and we'll talk about this next on our next slide. But again, remember that emergencies are not best served there. Our emergencies are always best served by coming to emergency walk-in appointments or calling our emergency phone number as well, 812-855-5711, option 1 if we are not open. We also have sexual assault counseling and other free workshops, in-person Monday motivators, online workshops, either live or pre-recorded. So I encourage you to explore depending upon what you're needing. And you can always combine a variety of these as well. Our Let's Talk program, as mentioned before, has 2 components. The first component are those free brief consultations. They're about 30 minutes. You're working with an actual counselor. Our counselors just typically go around to various centers on campus, and they're available. You can show up, sit down, talk about what you're needing to talk about, and then you can leave. Can come and do that more often. If you and your therapist decide, hey, it might be good to have something more formal, they can help bridge you into that as well. But that is a great resource. So if, let's say, something not so good happened, you got a grade you didn't like, you try calling CAPS, you find out, shoot, it's going to be a week before I can get in for my first appointment. But I need someone now, but it's not an emergency. Let's Talk Now is a great space to go. Visit our website, see where the individual is located, and feel free to show up that day. No appointment is needed. Let's Keep Talking is different as it is formal counseling, and it's targeted at our traditionally underserved students. So this is typically located at any of our cultural centers around campus. So if you identify with any of these cultural centers and you'd like to get scheduled, you can call CAPS and ask to schedule an appointment there, and you will not be required to go through an initial session, our CAPS Now appointment. Last but not least, we do have sexual assault crisis services available. So this is an extension of CAPS. So you would be working with counselors who are trauma-informed and specialize in working with those who have experienced sexual violence. So if this is a concern for you and you're wanting to seek counseling service on anything related to what is listed above, feel free to call and make an appointment. If you're unsure at that initial session, the therapist will be able to help guide you. These services can include general counseling, individual or group, support groups, psychiatry care, and information and assistance with medical, judicial, or legal issues. Our sexual assault crisis services also has an after-hours crisis line by dialing 812-855-8900. And please note that all services are available for all genders and all identities. Not affiliated with CAPS, but another resource on IU's campus is the Center for Human Growth. They also offer counseling. It is a little bit different from CAPS in the sense that it's typically cheaper. It's $0 to $15. You can You pay what you can afford to pay. They have evening hours available, and they do offer individual and couples counseling. I encourage you to explore their website or give them a call with any questions that you have. That concludes today's presentation. If you are needing more or if you have more questions, I encourage you to continue to explore our website or call us Monday through Friday, 8 until 4:30 at 812-855-5711 and select option 1 for after hours crisis care.